a mirror that won't reflect, and a truth Holmes can't ignore. Welcome to Detective Noir. I'm your host, Daniel Mercer. Tell me where you're watching from. I love seeing this community grow. Your comments always make this journey unforgettable. Let's dive in. A pale November fog curled through the narrow streets of London, blurring the gas lamps into dim halos and muffling the clatter of carriage wheels. From the vantage of our sitting room at Baker Street, I gazed upon this mist-shrouded city with no particular anticipation of excitement. Holmes, however, as ever, seemed restless with expectation. He sat in his armchair, pipe in hand, eyes fixed not upon the fire but on the shadows it cast across the carpet, as if even their fleeting shapes might conceal a pattern of significance. It was on such an evening that Mrs. Hudson ushered in a visitor who seemed carved from the very fog outside. Tall, pale, and attired in mourning black, the gentleman's face was drawn with the tension of one who had not slept for several nights. His voice trembled as he introduced himself as Mr. Edmund Barrow, a solicitor of some repute from Lincoln's Inn. Holmes inclined his head politely, but did not rise. "Pray, sir, come closer to the fire. Your coat is damp and your nerves, I dare say, more so. I perceive that you have come to us not merely as a man of law, but as one who fears a matter most unnatural." Barrow blinked in astonishment. "How could you know that, Mr. Holmes?" Holmes waved the matter aside with an impatience born of habit. "The crease upon your right sleeve indicates you have spent a restless night leaning upon your desk. Yet your boots are marked with chalk dust, more suited to a church crypt than to chambers at Lincoln's Inn. Your hesitation upon entering the room tells me you bring us not a case of property or inheritance, but something which unsettles your reason. Speak then, for the fog without will wait, but the fog within must be dispersed." With a visible shiver, Barrow began his tale. He had been charged with overseeing the estate of the late Lady Ashcombe, whose townhouse in Bloomsbury he was preparing for sale. The house, long shuttered after the lady's decline into seclusion, was in the process of being inventoried. Yet a strange occurrence had halted the proceedings. "In the drawing-room of the Ashcombe house," Barrow said, his voice tightening, "there hangs a tall Venetian mirror, gilt-framed and older than any living memory. Several days ago, one of the maidservants screamed upon dusting it. She swore that while she gazed into the glass she saw nothing, not her own face nor the room nor any reflection at all. Only a void, black and depthless. Since then others have claimed the same, that the mirror refuses to show a face." Watson, though no stranger to the oddities of human imagination, felt a chill at the words. "You do not suggest— Surely you do not mean some supernatural agency, sir?" Barrow's hand tightened upon the brim of his hat. "Doctor, I am a man of the law and thus bound to reason, yet reason fails me here. The staff refused to enter the room, and I myself, when I stood before it, though the chamber about me was visible, my own face was absent. So I tell you, it was as though the glass had swallowed me." Holmes's eyes gleamed with a light more electric than the fire's. He leaned forward, steepling his fingers. "A mirror that refuses a face. Curious indeed. There are, of course, explanations both simple and elaborate. A warped surface, a trick of light, or some cunning artifice devised by human hands. And yet it is the why that interests me, Mr. Barrow. Why should anyone contrive such an illusion, and to what end?" Barrow lowered his gaze. "That is what I beg you to discover, for there is more. 2 nights past, a watchman stationed at the house was found unconscious before that mirror, his mind so shaken he has yet to utter a coherent word. Scotland Yard dismisses it as hysteria. I cannot." Holmes rose at last, drawing on his long coat with swift determination. "Watson, I trust your medical bag is in readiness. We may find use for it. Mr. Barrow, kindly arrange our admission to Ashcombe House this very night. Fog is the ally of mischief, and mischief, I think, has already taken up residence before that Venetian mirror, and so it was, upon a night swaddled in smoke and silence, that we set forth into the heart of London's mysteries, toward a mirror that would not show a face, and toward a truth that, as Holmes assured me, would be stranger still than the void it reflected. The fog that night was a tangible thing, clinging to one's coat and hat like a shroud, and it accompanied us as our hansom rattled toward Bloomsbury, under the dim flicker of gas lamps. Holmes sat beside me, his lean figure hunched, hands clasped tightly about the head of his cane. He spoke little, his eyes darting toward the blurred city outside as if he sought some invisible sign in the obscurity. Mr. Edmund Barrow, opposite us, stared down at his gloves and shifted them from one hand to the other, every so often sighing as though in anticipation of some unseen weight pressing further upon him. "You will pardon me, Mr. Barrow," I ventured, attempting to lighten the silence, "but your description of the mirror is extraordinary, though I cannot help but wonder whether fatigue and the nerves of the servants may have played some part. In an old house half-lit and filled with dust, even the sturdiest imagination may falter." Barrow raised his eyes briefly. "Doctor, I have thought much the same, and yet I cannot dismiss what I saw with my own eyes. The room reflected, yes, the fireplace, the carpet, even the lamps. But where I ought to have stood, there was only vacancy. The absence was so complete, so unnatural, that I felt chilled to the marrow." Holmes drew upon his pipe, which glowed faintly in the gloom of the cab. "Absence itself is a kind of presence," he murmured. "The deliberate removal of an image is not less significant than its addition. The glass shows a room but excludes a man. The question is not whether the servants are hysterical, nor whether you suffer nerves, but rather, for whom was that mirror designed?" Barrow shifted uncomfortably, but before he might reply, the cab drew up before a tall, shuttered house that loomed like a mausoleum above the fog. Its iron railings glistened with moisture. Its steps were slick and pale in the lamplight. A constable stationed at the gate saluted Barrow, who explained we were expected. Holmes ascended the stairs swiftly, his boots striking with decisive rhythm, and we were admitted into a hall of cavernous silence. The Ashcombe townhouse, though dim, retained the grandeur of a more brilliant age. Heavy drapes hung at every tall window, portraits in oil brooded from gilt frames, and the scent of damp plaster mingled with the faint odor of polish recently applied to neglected wood. Our footsteps echoed with a hollowness that seemed almost too loud. Holmes wasted no time in mounting the stairs, his long coat brushing against the carved banister, and we followed him to the drawing-room upon the first floor. The chamber itself was stately, high-ceilinged, panelled in walnut and furnished in sombre velvet. At its far end stood the object of our journey, the mirror. Nearly 8 feet in height, framed in ornate gilding of florid design, it commanded the wall like some unblinking sentinel. Even across the room I felt its presence. The surface gleamed in the lamplight, cold and hard, yet possessed of a peculiar depth. Holmes approached it without hesitation. He moved as a duelist does, advancing with measured steps, his keen eyes flitting from detail to detail, the mounting of the frame, the slight slant at which it leaned against the plaster, the angle of the sconces that flanked it. At last he halted directly before it, his lean face reflected, or rather half-reflected, for though the room itself appeared in clear outline, Holmes's features seemed to falter. His figure was visible, his outline distinct, yet the face where it ought to have been shimmered oddly and resolved into nothing. It was as if the mirror tolerated the world, but refused to acknowledge the man. Even Holmes drew in a quick breath. "Extraordinary," he said softly. "Watson, step forward. Let us see if the same defect attends you." I confess a reluctance seized me, yet I obeyed. I moved beside him and faced the mirror. To my astonishment, the same phenomenon presented itself. My body stood clear in that glass, the familiar shape of my shoulders, my coat, even the watch chain across my vest. But where my head should have been, there was emptiness. Not a blur, not a distortion, but a void, as though my countenance had been cut away with some invisible knife. Barrow uttered a muffled exclamation. "You see now, gentlemen. It is no trick of hysteria." Holmes leaned so near the surface that the smoke of his pipe drifted across it like a veil. He tapped the glass lightly with his cane, then bent to inspect the join where gilding met wall. His fingers traced the carvings with a lover's precision, and he crouched to peer beneath the lower rim. "Watson," he said after a long silence, "note the peculiar flatness of the glass. Venetian, yes, but with a later alteration. The surface is of 2 parts, not 1. A curious lamination has been employed here, almost as though one sheet overlays another. The separation is imperceptible to the eye save when the object reflected contains depth in its shading, such as the human face." I bent nearer. To my untrained eye, the glass seemed whole, yet Holmes's gaze was unwavering. But to what end, Holmes? What purpose could such a device serve? He smiled faintly, that rare smile which never failed to unnerve me. "That, my dear fellow, is the essence of the problem. When a contrivance is so elaborate, one must seek the motive that warranted its construction. Barrow, when was this mirror first hung in the house? The solicitor shook his head. Lady Ashcombe herself spoke of it as an heirloom. Her husband, the late Lord Ashcombe, acquired many oddities during his travels upon the continent. Mirrors, relics, even fragments of statuary. The Venetian piece was said to date to the 17th century. It has remained in that position since her widowhood. Holmes's fingers rapped lightly upon the gilt. Then it is not Lady Ashcombe's invention. No, the hand that wrought this meant something more. A mirror that denies the beholder his own face. What better symbol for the annihilation of identity? And yet symbolism alone does not suffice. There must be practical utility. We examined the chamber further. Holmes scrutinized the carpet before the mirror, noting faint impressions where some heavy object had once stood. He crouched, then beckoned me with a swift gesture. Observe, Watson, the pile here has been pressed in 2 parallel lines. Something rectangular, perhaps a chest or case, occupied this position not long ago. And note the dust upon the window ledge, disturbed by recent hands. It was then that Barrow, pale and anxious, whispered of the watchman who had been overcome. They found him lying senseless on the very rug where you kneel. He has spoken nothing but nonsense since, muttering of faces in the dark. The physicians can make little of him. Holmes's eyes gleamed. Faces in the dark indeed. Watson, you shall attend this poor fellow on the morrow. His babblings may be the very clue we require. For my part, I suspect this mirror has served as the focus of some elaborate ruse, whether for concealment, intimidation, or darker purpose I cannot yet determine. He straightened suddenly and strode to the door, pulling aside the velvet curtain that led to a smaller adjoining chamber. Within, by the light of his lantern, we discerned a narrow service corridor and a panel of wood behind the mirror itself. Holmes' long fingers sought the edges, pressing, tapping, until at last a hidden catch yielded. A section of panel slid back, revealing a narrow cavity. Inside that recess lay a curious mechanism, a frame of wires and tinted glass, arranged with intricate care. Holmes bent over it, his eyes alight. As I surmised. A secondary plate, set to obscure the most vital portion of a reflection. Ingenious, though crude in its application, by manipulating the light from these sconces, the artificer ensured that all else in the chamber would appear, while the subtle play of angles erased the human visage. But why? I cried. What earthly reason? Holmes interrupted, his voice low, taut with interest. Because, Watson, there are moments when it is most desirable that a man's face be hidden. To stand before a witness and yet remain faceless, that is a weapon more potent than any dagger. Someone has employed this device to sow fear, to unman the stoutest spirit. That watchman, no doubt, saw not merely his own absence, but perhaps some apparition contrived behind the glass. Barrow groaned softly, sinking into a chair. This grows more dreadful with every word. Do you think, Mr. Holmes, that Lady Ashcombe herself knew of such a contrivance? Holmes replaced the panel and turned to us, his face composed yet grave. That is what we must now discover. If she did, then the mystery is old, a relic of her husband's curiosities. But if she did not, then someone has tampered with this house more recently, with an object in mind still concealed from us. The pressed carpet suggests that some heavy chest has been removed, perhaps only days ago. We must learn what it contained, and who had the power to remove it. The clock upon the mantel chimed the hour, its tone muffled by the drapes. The fog pressed against the panes, and the mirror loomed behind us with silent menace. Holmes stood, hands clasped behind him, his gaze fixed upon that depthless surface. Watson, he said at length, there is a design here, subtle yet deliberate. We stand at the threshold of an enigma that someone has gone to great lengths to construct. But remember, the greater the artifice, the more fragile the thread upon which it hangs. We must follow the faintest trace, be it a pressed carpet, a disturbed ledge, or a babbling watchman, for therein lies the key. I could not shake the image of my absent face, nor the chill it had cast upon me. Yet in Holmes's quiet certainty, I found reassurance. He had already seen beyond the illusion, already set his mind to untangle the web. And so we left that chamber with its hollow mirror, the sound of our footfalls echoing like whispers of some unseen presence that waited, patient, for discovery. The fog had thickened to a clammy curtain by the time we quitted the Ashcombe house, and our hansom rolled through streets that seemed more suggestion than substance. Holmes was unusually silent, his gaze fixed upon some invisible geometry in the dark, his pipe long extinguished between his fingers. Barrow, his nerves near collapse, pressed his face into his gloved hands more than once during that ride, and it was with evident relief that he alighted at his chambers, promising to secure for us any documents relating to the estate. Holmes offered him but the briefest nod before directing our driver back toward Baker Street. Once within the warmth of our sitting room, with the fire kindled to a vigorous glow, Holmes at last removed his coat and stood before the hearth, his eyes reflecting the flames. I confess I was still unsettled by the uncanny absence in that mirror, and my medical instincts warred with my reason. There had been no trick of fatigue, no misfiring of the senses. It had been a tangible negation of my own face. Holmes, however, seemed invigorated rather than shaken. "You observed, Watson," he began at length, "that the illusion was confined precisely to the human countenance. Not the hands nor the form, but the features alone. That precision betrays deliberate design. It is no accident, no quirk of Venetian craftsmanship. The mechanism I revealed behind the panel confirms it. We are not confronted with the supernatural, but with human cunning." I stirred uneasily in my chair. "Cunning to what purpose? You suggested intimidation, but why would anyone go to such lengths merely to unnerve a servant or a watchman?" Holmes shook his head. "Intimidation is but one application. Consider, Watson, the significance of identity. A man without a face cannot be recognized. A witness confronted with such a sight may well doubt his senses, may hesitate to testify to what he has seen. Suppose you wish to conceal the presence of an accomplice or to render a witness powerless. Would not such a device be most effective?" I frowned. "Then you suspect the mirror was used in the commission of a crime?" "I suspect," Holmes replied, pacing the carpet, "that the crime is yet incomplete. A chest has been removed from that room, something of weight and value. The dust upon the sill tells of recent disturbance. The watchman may have stumbled upon this very act and was silenced by terror more effectively than by force. If so, then whoever has tampered with that mirror is not yet finished with Ashcombe House. Barrow's fears are not groundless." I could not suppress a shiver, for the image of a faceless reflection still clung to me. Yet Holmes's calm certainty provided a counterweight, and I resolved to press him no further that night. We retired late, though I suspect Holmes did not sleep at all. The next morning found us at St. Bartholomew's Hospital, where the unfortunate watchman had been conveyed. Holmes, in his customary brisk fashion, declared that my medical training rendered me the natural confidant for the man's condition, and I accompanied him into a ward that smelled of carbolic and damp stone. The patient, a sturdy fellow of middle age, lay pale upon his cot, his eyes flickering with restless dreams. His lips moved constantly, shaping words that eluded sense. I leaned close, listening with care. At intervals, a phrase emerged with clarity. "Faces, gone. The dark takes them, no eyes, no mouth, only shadows." He would then lapse into incoherence, his voice a hoarse murmur. His pulse, though rapid, showed no organic disease. His mind had suffered a shock rather than his body. I turned to Holmes, who stood watching intently. "The man has endured fright of an unusual order," I said quietly. "I have seen soldiers rendered speechless by the cannon's roar, yet this seems of a different quality. He is haunted by what he believes he saw, and it has unsettled his reason." Holmes nodded gravely. "Just so. But note, Watson, that he speaks of faces in the plural. He did not merely see his own absent reflection. He saw others, or believed he did. That detail is crucial. Someone employed the mirror not merely as a negation, but as a stage upon which to conjure phantoms. The man glimpsed figures where none should be, and it shattered him. We left the ward with little comfort for the poor fellow's condition. As we stepped into the crisp daylight, Holmes hailed a cab with sudden energy. "To Lincoln's Inn," he instructed the driver, his voice sharp with resolve. "Barrow must provide the inventory of Lady Ashcombe's effects. Somewhere amidst her heirlooms lies the key to this puzzle." At the solicitor's chambers, we were admitted without delay. Barrow, still pale from the night before, produced a sheaf of documents, ledgers, receipts, and lists of the late lady's possessions. Holmes spread them upon the desk with an eagerness that lit his eyes. He traced the columns with one long finger, pausing now and again to mutter, and again to mutter. "Note here, Watson," he said, pointing to an entry. "A Venetian speculum, gilt frame of unusual workmanship. That description accords with our mirror. But see, its provenance is marked as acquired in Venice 1863 by Lord Ashcombe. And here, one oaken coffer banded with iron, contents unspecified, received simultaneously, the very chest whose absence we noted upon the carpet. The two were obtained together. That is no accident. Barrow adjusted his spectacles nervously. I had not considered the connection, Mr. Holmes. The chest was missing when I began the inventory. I assumed it had been moved during Lady Ashcombe's decline. She lived her last years in seclusion, and the servants spoke little. Holmes leaned back, steepling his fingers. A mirror that erases identity, and a chest that vanishes with it. One may be certain that the two were designed for concerted purpose. The question remains, what was housed within that coffer? And why should anyone trouble to remove it only now after Lady Ashcombe's death? Barrow spread his hands helplessly. I know not. There are whispers, of course, that Lord Ashcombe trafficked in curiosities best left untouched. Some said he returned from Venice with relics of a sinister kind, though such gossip is common enough when a man of means indulges eccentric tastes. Holmes rose abruptly. We must search deeper, Watson. Ashcombe House holds secrets yet unrevealed. The mechanism behind that mirror was no casual contrivance. Someone has resurrected it for a purpose, and that purpose is not yet fulfilled. That evening we returned to the house, accompanied by Barrow, and a reluctant constable who muttered continuously about wasting his time. Holmes directed us not to the drawing-room this time, but to the cellar. Lantern in hand, he led the way down the damp stone steps, every surface furred with mildew. The air was heavy, stale with disuse. In a far corner, half concealed behind wine racks, Holmes discovered marks upon the floor, scratches where something weighty had been dragged. He knelt, examining the grooves with a surgeon's precision. Yes, Watson, the chest was stored here. Recent removal, the dust still displaced. And here, mud upon the flagstones. The intruder came from without. We traced the trail to a small door that opened into a narrow mews. The lock was splintered, as though forced with care. Holmes's eyes glinted. Our man entered by stealth, removed the coffer, and departed unseen amidst the fog. He needed the mirror to complete his artifice, perhaps to cow the watchman should he interfere. But the true prize was this chest. The constable muttered darkly about housebreakers, but Holmes ignored him, his gaze fixed upon the marks that led into the street. 2 men carried it, judging by the weight distribution, and they wore boots of foreign make. The sole pattern is unlike our cobbler's work. Venetian, perhaps. It seems the shadow of that city still clings to Lord Ashcombe's relics. As we emerged once more into the fog-choked night, Holmes's expression was grave yet alive with purpose. Watson, he said softly, we are upon the edge of something most curious. A mirror that steals the face, a chest borne off in secrecy, and whispers of Venetian relics. Do you not perceive the pattern? It is no ordinary burglary. It is a design woven across decades, a web whose strands reach from Venice to London. And somewhere within that web waits the spider who has drawn us in. I could offer no reply, for my mind reeled with images of faceless phantoms, of coffers hidden in damp cellars, of unseen hands prizing open old secrets. Yet Holmes strode with unflinching resolve, his eyes set upon the fog, as though he already discerned the path ahead. And in that moment, I knew that the true mystery of the mirror was only beginning to unfold. The following day dawned grey and sodden, with rain slanting against the panes and dripping from the gutters of Baker Street. Holmes was already at the table, a spread of maps, ledgers, and correspondence before him, when I descended from my room. He looked as if he had not slept, though his manner was crisp and precise. The events at Ashcombe House had evidently provided him with the stimulant his restless intellect required. Watson, he said as I drew near, our inquiry deepens, and each thread we pluck leads to another knot. The oaken chest, the Venetian glass, the vanished reflections, these are not disconnected curiosities. They belong to a scheme most deliberate. He tapped a finger against a marked page in the ledger we had obtained from Barrow. Here, an annotation scarcely legible written in Lord Ashcombe's own hand, I suspect. Speculum occultere. The Latin, as you know, means to conceal by means of a mirror. It is not the language of idle collectors, but of those who seek to clothe their pursuits in secrecy. I leaned over the entry, the faint ink barely visible in the dim light. You mean to suggest Lord Ashcombe was engaged in some clandestine practice? Alchemy, perhaps, or one of those mystical arts that flourished upon the continent. Holmes's eyes gleamed with disdainful amusement. Superstition, my dear fellow, is but the costume behind which men hide their schemes. If Lord Ashcombe trafficked in such things, it was not from conviction but from calculation. The chest procured with the mirror must have contained some object of singular value, either to his vanity or to his purposes. That it has now been removed suggests it has renewed significance in the present. Our deliberations were interrupted by a knock, and Mrs. Hudson admitted Inspector Lestrade. His boots muddied from the morning's rain. He looked harried and irritable, though there was a flicker of relief in his eyes when they rested upon Holmes. "You've heard?" "No doubt," Lestrade said briskly, "of the disturbance at the Ashcombe property last night." Holmes's lips curled faintly. "I anticipated such a report. Pray enlighten us with the particulars." "The constable you left on duty," Lestrade explained, "swears he saw a figure at one of the upper windows, a tall man in dark garments, who appeared for only a moment before vanishing. When the constable entered to investigate, the rooms were deserted, though a candle had been left burning in the drawing-room. What's more, the mirror you examined had been shifted upon its mountings, as if someone had tampered with the mechanism again." Holmes' eyes narrowed. "Indeed, our quarry is bold returning so soon to the scene. He is not finished with that mirror. Did your constable observe anything further?" Lestrade hesitated. "Only this, though I scarce believe it worth repeating. He said the figure at the window had no face, none that he could discern at least. A trick of the light, no doubt, but it set his nerves in a bad state." Holmes chuckled softly. "Not a trick of the light, Inspector, but a trick of human ingenuity. It appears our adversary delights in exploiting fear. But fear is an unstable weapon. It fails the moment it is understood." He turned abruptly, gathering his papers. "Watson, we must return to Ashcombe House at once. Lestrade, if you wish to accompany us, you may find yourself witness to a revelation." By midday we stood once more within the melancholy grandeur of the Ashcombe drawing-room. The mirror, though unmoved to my eye, bore subtle marks of interference, fresh scratches along its gilded frame, a faint odour of oil upon the sconces. Holmes examined these signs with rapt attention, then drew forth a lens to inspect the panel we had previously uncovered. "Note here, Watson," he murmured. "The mechanism has been adjusted, tightened. Our man is refining his art. He intends to employ this device for some specific demonstration. The absence of identity is not merely symbolic. It is preparation for an act that hinges upon invisibility." As he spoke, Barrow entered hurriedly, his expression troubled. He held a folded letter in his trembling hand. "This arrived by post scarcely an hour ago," he said. "It is addressed to me, but bears no signature." He extended the paper, which Holmes took and unfolded. The writing was jagged, hurried, but legible. "Meddle no further with what you do not comprehend. The mirror is ours by right, the coffer also. Cease your inquiries, or the faceless void shall claim another." This is no warning, but a certainty. Holmes's eyes glittered as he read. "Ah, Watson, the mask of the adversary reveals itself not by face but by hand. Observe the doubled consonants, the irregular slant. A foreigner, striving to imitate our hand. Italian, I suspect. The phrasing, too, ours by right, smacks of a claim of possession rather than mere thievery." Barrow wrung his hands. "What am I to do? The Ashcombe heirs will demand explanation, and yet I dare not reveal such threats." "You will do nothing," Holmes replied curtly. "Leave the matter to me. Whoever pens such letters seeks not only to frighten but to assert dominion. That pride shall betray them." We spent the afternoon in further search of the house, exploring chambers long abandoned. In a library thick with dust, Holmes discovered another trace, a torn scrap of parchment bearing a seal, half erased yet discernibly Venetian. The fragment bore the outline of a lion, wings outstretched, clutching a book, the symbol of St. Mark, patron of Venice. Holmes held it up with satisfaction. "There, Watson, is our link. Lord Ashcombe brought not curios, but relics of some Venetian society. Whether mercantile, political, or secretive, we shall yet determine. That coffer held more than trinkets. It held a legacy, one that others still covet fiercely. The daylight faded as we completed our search, and at last Holmes declared our task concluded for the moment. Yet as we prepared to depart, a sudden noise echoed through the corridors, a soft but distinct creak as of a footfall upon ancient boards. Lestrade drew his revolver at once, but Holmes raised a hand. "Remain still," he whispered. "He is here." We listened, hearts quickened as the sound came again. 2 steps, then silence. Holmes moved with panther's grace toward the source, motioning for us to follow. Down a narrow passage he led us, past shuttered windows and faded tapestries, until we reached a door slightly ajar. Holmes pushed it open swiftly, lantern raised. The chamber beyond was small, barren, save for a broken chair and a scattering of straw upon the floor. Yet upon the sill of the window lay the print of a boot, still damp with rain. Holmes leaned close, studying the impression. "The same foreign soul," he murmured. "He has been here observing us, perhaps listening to our every word. Bold indeed, but not infallible." He straightened, his expression fierce with determination. "We are dealing with a foe who cloaks himself in fear, who believes the shroud of mystery renders him untouchable. But I shall strip away his artifices until nothing remains but the naked truth. And then, Watson, we shall see the face that Mirror has sought so carefully to deny." We left Ashcombe House in the darkness, the rain still falling in sheets. Holmes walked swiftly, every movement taut with purpose. I dared not disturb his thoughts, but I knew we were closer to the heart of the riddle. For though the mirror still refused to show a face, Holmes had already glimpsed in his mind's eye the features of the hand that guided it. That night Holmes scarcely touched the supper Mrs. Hudson had set before us. He paced the length of our sitting room with a restless precision, pausing only to strike a match for his pipe or to glance at the papers and fragments he had laid out upon the table. I had seen him in many moods, from languid indifference to the most acute concentration, but rarely had I seen him so wholly absorbed by the intangible outline of an adversary not yet grasped. His eyes were bright, his movements abrupt, as though he played a silent chess match against an unseen opponent. "Watson," he said suddenly, halting before the fire, "we are not confronting mere burglary. Mark how swiftly the intruder returned to Ashcombe House after our first inspection. He has purpose, and that purpose demands urgency. He believes the coffer contains something of such moment that delay is intolerable. When a man risks discovery so boldly, he is either desperate or supremely confident." I ventured that the anonymous letter suggested desperation. Holmes shook his head. "No, Watson. A desperate man begs for secrecy. This one commands it, as though he possesses authority, or at least believes he does. Did you note the phrasing, ours by right? He considers himself custodian of some legacy. The Venetian seal we discovered confirms as much. There is an organization at work, not a lone thief." I was about to reply when the bell rang sharply below. A moment later, Mrs. Hudson entered with a note delivered by hand. Holmes tore it open, his eyes flicking across the lines. A smile touched his lips, thin and dangerous. "It seems, Watson, that our adversary grows bolder yet. He invites me to meet him." The paper contained but a few words, written in the same jagged hand as the earlier threat. "If you seek the truth of the mirror, come alone to the Thames at Blackfriars midnight. One companion only. Speak of this to none, or the void shall swallow more than faces." Holmes folded the sheet with deliberate care. "Observe the arrogance. He dictates terms, demands secrecy, yet by naming the place and hour he grants us the advantage." "We shall attend, of course," I protested, reminding him of the danger, but he silenced me with a glance. "You know me too well, Watson, to think I would resist. Besides, the invitation reveals more than it conceals. Why the Thames? Why Blackfriars? That bridge has long been a rendezvous of shadowy dealings. He chooses it not merely for privacy, but for symbolism. The river swallows secrets as the mirror swallows faces. The hours crept with agonizing slowness until the appointed time. At last we set forth into the misty night, the streets glistening beneath the lamps. Our cab deposited us near the bridge, where the fog lay thick upon the water, muffling the sound of oars and bells alike. Holmes strode with quiet certainty, his hat pulled low, his eyes ever searching. We paused beneath one of the great arches, the river lapping darkly at the stones. A figure emerged from the gloom, a tall man cloaked heavily, his face obscured by a scarf and hat pulled low. He raised a hand in signal. Holmes motioned me to remain a pace behind, then stepped forward with his usual composure. "You are punctual," the stranger said, his accent unmistakably foreign, Italian inflection coloring every word. "That is well." I had feared the great detective might prove too cautious. Holmes's voice was cool and even. "On the contrary, sir. Punctuality is the courtesy of kings and of rogues. Which are you? The man gave a harsh laugh. Call me what you will. I am the voice of those who claim what is rightfully ours. Lord Ashcombe stole from Venice relics that did not belong to him. The mirror, the coffer, these are fragments of a greater whole. You meddle in matters that surpass your comprehension. Holmes's gaze never wavered. And yet comprehension is precisely my business. If these relics are yours by right, why not reclaim them openly through the channels of law? The stranger's tone hardened, because the law does not recognize what it cannot name. These objects were never meant for the commerce of men. They belong to us, to a society older than your empire, older than your crown. You shall cease your interference, Mr. Holmes, or others will suffer as the watchman did. Holmes inclined his head slightly, as though considering. You speak of legacy, of ancient rights, yet you hide your face even as your mirror denies ours. What is it you fear, sir? That your identity, once revealed, will shatter the mystique upon which you depend. The man stiffened, and I saw his gloved hand twitch toward his coat. Holmes, however, remained utterly still, his calm more disarming than any threat. I have heard enough, the stranger said at last. Leave the Ashcombe matter, or the void shall claim not merely faces but lives. This is your final warning. With that he stepped back into the fog, vanishing as swiftly as he had appeared. We strained our ears for the sound of footsteps, but there was nothing save the river's murmur. Holmes drew a long breath, his eyes gleaming with satisfaction. Watson, I could not have asked for more. He has betrayed his origin, confirmed the Venetian link, and revealed the existence of a society whose relics he seeks. He threatens because he fears exposure. His confidence masks unease. But Holmes, I protested, he vanished into the mist. How shall we ever trace him? Holmes's smile was thin. By his own arrogance. Did you not note the faint scent upon his garments? Musk and clove, such as is used in certain Venetian colognes. And his boots. He trod heavily, the iron studs striking the stone. Tomorrow we shall make inquiries among the foreign enclaves of London. There are only so many Italians of his stature who haunt the riverfront. We returned to Baker Street near dawn, weary yet charged with grim determination. Holmes spent the morning in correspondence, dispatching notes to contacts among the shipping companies, the police and certain less savory acquaintances who owed him favors. By afternoon he had gathered a remarkable quantity of intelligence. There is a Venetian lodge operating in secrecy within London, he explained, his long fingers tapping upon a dossier of letters. They trace their lineage to a brotherhood once tasked with guarding sacred relics of St. Mark. The lion seal we discovered is their emblem. Lord Ashcombe, during his travels, acquired objects that belonged to them. He may have purchased, stolen, or deceived, it matters not. They claim them still, I leaned forward. And the mirror, Holmes? What function could it serve for such a society? Holmes' voice was low, deliberate. Imagine a chamber in which men meet, each concealing his identity, each reduced to a faceless figure. Secrets may be shared, decisions made, without fear of betrayal. The mirror was no mere curiosity. It was an instrument of power, enabling anonymity. The coffer, I surmise, contained records, names, oaths, documents whose exposure could destroy reputations. To possess such relics is to hold dominion over men. The implication struck me with force. Then whoever removed that chest now holds power of blackmail. Precisely, Watson. And our Venetian adversaries will not rest until it is restored to them, or silenced forever. That is why the watchman was struck down. That is why threats rain upon us. We are upon the trail of men who wield secrecy as their weapon, and the mirror is their device. As evening fell once more, Holmes rose from his chair, his eyes alight with fierce resolve. Come, Watson. Tonight we shall set our own snare. If our adversary delights in shadows, let us lure him into the light. There is but one place where he must return, the Ashcombe drawing-room. And when he does, we shall be waiting. And so, with the fog once more closing in upon London, we prepared ourselves for a vigil in that haunted house. The mirror awaited us, silent and inscrutable, its depth concealing both menace and revelation. Yet beside it stood Holmes, whose eyes saw deeper than any glass, and I knew that whatever void threatened to swallow us, he would drag the truth from its depths before the night was done. The night was done. The fog lay heavy over Bloomsbury that evening, thick as wool as Holmes and I returned once more to the Ashcombe townhouse. A constable had been posted at the corner, but Holmes dismissed him with instructions that brooked no argument, explaining that our quarry must believe himself unobserved if he were to walk into the trap. Barrow had been warned away for his own safety, and Lestrade, though grumbling, had grudgingly agreed to let Holmes conduct the vigil in his own manner. Thus it was that only Holmes and I ascended the creaking stairs, the echo of our boots mingling with the sigh of the draught that stirred through shuttered corridors. The drawing-room was as we had left it, vast, sombre, and dominated by that uncanny mirror which reflected all yet denied the essence of the beholder. Holmes moved with quiet efficiency, adjusting the position of 2 oil lamps so that their light fell obliquely across the surface. He crouched once more at the panel he had earlier uncovered, his nimble fingers ensuring the mechanism was untouched. Satisfied, he drew the heavy drapes closed, leaving only a narrow slit through which he might observe the street below. "Watson," he said softly, "our adversary is emboldened by success. Twice he has entered these walls unopposed, and twice he has made good his escape. Tonight he shall find the hunter in place of the prey. Keep your revolver near, but remember, our purpose is not his death, but his unmasking. The truth must be revealed, else we gain nothing." I nodded, though my hand instinctively touched the weapon at my side. The atmosphere of that chamber was oppressive in the extreme. Each tick of the mantel clock seemed amplified, each flutter of the flame an omen. We waited thus in silence, the minutes dragging until at last Holmes, who had been peering from the curtain, made a slight gesture. "He comes," he whispered. I joined him at the gap and beheld a shadowed figure moving swiftly along the street, pausing only to glance behind him before ascending the steps. The latch turned with a stealthy precision, and a moment later the sound of soft footfalls crept through the hall below. Holmes extinguished one lamp, plunging us into half-darkness, and motioned me to a recess beside the hearth. The door opened with scarcely a creak, and the figure entered, a tall man cloaked and hooded, carrying a small lantern, whose feeble glow played across the mirror's gilded frame. He advanced without hesitation, setting down his lantern before the glass, and from beneath his cloak he drew a bundle wrapped in oilcloth. With deft movements he unwrapped it, revealing not treasure but tools, slender rods, a small vial of liquid, a roll of parchment. He set about adjusting the mechanism behind the panel, humming under his breath in a tongue I could not place, but which had the cadence of Italian prayer. Holmes watched like a hawk, his eyes gleaming in the half-light. At last, when the man poured a few drops of liquid upon the mirror's surface and the reflection shivered unnaturally, Holmes stepped forward. "That will suffice," he said, his voice cutting the silence like a blade. The intruder started violently, his hand flying to his cloak. But Holmes was upon him in an instant, seizing his wrist with iron grip. I rushed to Holmes's side, revolver drawn, and together we forced the man back from the mirror. His hood fell, revealing a gaunt, bearded face with deep-set eyes that glittered with both rage and fear. "You!" Holmes exclaimed. "As I suspected. Signor Calvi, once of Venice, late of Newgate. I wondered when you would emerge from the fog." The man spat an oath in his native tongue, struggling fiercely. "Release me, Englishman. You do not comprehend the power you trifle with." Holmes's voice was cold as steel. "On the contrary, I comprehend enough. You and your brethren sought to reclaim what Ashcombe stole. You returned for the coffer, and now you refine this contrivance for your own ends. But tonight your mask is torn away, and your society's secrecy with it." Calvi ceased his struggles, a malignant smile twisting his features. "You think to expose us? You think the Yard will listen to tales of faceless mirrors and Venetian relics? They will call you mad, Holmes. The Brotherhood is older than your crown, stronger than your courts. Even should you drag me in chains, others will rise in my place." Holmes regarded him with that inscrutable expression I knew so well, half scorn, half triumph. "Perhaps, but the law requires only one culprit for one crime, and you, Signor Calvi, stand in just such a position. The chest is gone, yes, but I shall trace it through the men who bore it, through the docks and the ships that sail under Venetian flag, and when I do, the Brotherhood's secrets shall be as ashes in the wind." At that moment, there came a sudden crash from the corridor. Another figure burst into the chamber, shorter and broader, wielding a cudgel. He rushed at Holmes with a guttural shout. I fired instinctively, the report deafening in the enclosed room, and the man staggered back, his weapon clattering to the floor. He collapsed with a groan, clutching his shoulder where my bullet had grazed him. Holmes never loosened his grip on Calvi. "As I predicted," he said coolly. "2 men bore the chest, and 2 returned for their device. Well done, Watson. You have merely winged him, I see. Fortunate, for we shall want him to talk." The commotion brought the constable rushing in, his whistle shrilling down the street. Within minutes the house was swarming with officers. Lestrade among them, his face a mixture of relief and vexation. "Well, Mr. Holmes," he said, "you've netted your fish again, though the tale of how you caught them will sound queer enough at the Yard. Foreign cutthroats, Venetian brotherhoods, mirrors that steal faces, it's all beyond me. Then be content with this." "Inspector," Holmes replied, "these men stand guilty of housebreaking, of assault and of conspiracy. That is sufficient for your purposes. The rest—" his eyes flicked to the mirror, whose surface now lay dull and lifeless. "The rest shall remain for the mind to unravel, where the law cannot tread." Calvi was dragged away in irons, his companion groaning under guard. As the tumult subsided and the constables departed, Holmes and I remained in the silent chamber. He stood before the mirror, his reflection now whole once more, the trick of absence gone with Calvi's meddling. "Do you see, Watson?" he said softly. "The illusion was never in the glass, but in the purpose behind it. Men create phantoms when they seek to conceal the truth. Strip away their devices and they are but ordinary criminals." I regarded the gilded frame, the surface smooth and unbroken, and shuddered at the memory of my faceless reflection. "Yet extraordinary in their cunning," I murmured. Holmes smiled faintly. "Cunning, yes, but cunning always overreaches itself. In seeking to frighten, they revealed their design. In claiming secrecy, they betrayed their society. And in threatening us, they ensured their own capture. The spider we have unmasked, Watson, but the web still stretches far. That chest holds the heart of the matter, and until we trace it, the case remains incomplete." The rain beat against the windows, and the house seemed to exhale, its secrets momentarily laid bare. Holmes gathered his coat about him, his eyes bright with the fire of pursuit. "Come, Watson. Tonight we have caught the intruders. Tomorrow we begin the hunt for the coffer. The true revelation lies not in what the mirror concealed, but in what that chest may yet unveil. And so, as dawn crept over the sodden streets of London, we left Ashcombe House behind us, carrying with us not the resolution of a mystery, but the promise of one still deeper, still more perilous. For Holmes had glimpsed beyond the veil, and in that glimpse lay the certainty that the mirror's enigma was but the prelude to a darker truth yet waiting to be uncovered. The morning after the capture of Calvi and his accomplice broke cold and clear, as though the city itself sought to sweep away the mists of the night before. Yet within our rooms at Baker Street, the air was thick with smoke from Holmes's pipe and with the restless current of his thoughts. He had hardly slept, choosing instead to pore over maps of the riverfront and manifests from the shipping offices. His long fingers drummed restlessly upon the arm of his chair, and his gaze was fixed not on the papers before him, but on some internal arrangement of facts, some silent chain of reasoning that tightened with every moment. "You see, Watson," he began abruptly, "our capture of Calvi provides but a single strand of this web. The man is a subordinate, fierce but unimaginative. It is the chest that governs the design, for within it lies the true treasure, the records of a Venetian brotherhood that thrived in secrecy for centuries. That coffer was not removed from Ashcombe House by accident. It was seized according to a plan, and it has doubtless been conveyed by now toward the docks, there to be hidden or dispatched abroad." I recalled vividly the gouges upon the cellar stones where the heavy object had been dragged, and the mud upon the flagstones. "Then you believe the coffer has already left the city?" Holmes shook his head. "Not yet. London's docks are a labyrinth, but they do not yield their secrets so swiftly. To ship such an object abroad requires preparation, bribery, and collusion. It will not have passed unnoticed. Our task is to trace the hands that bore it and the vessel that awaits it. Calvi will not confess, but his silence speaks volumes. He protects a chain of command above him, and it is that chain we must follow, that chain we must follow, that—" Even as he spoke there came a rap at the door, and Lestrade entered, his expression that of a man both weary and vexed. He dropped heavily into a chair, brushing rain from his coat. "Your foreigners are a stubborn lot, Mr. Holmes," he said. "The one you call Calvi refuses all questioning. His companion curses in half a dozen tongues, but tells us nothing of value. If I did not know you better, I'd think you'd handed me a pair of lunatics rather than burglars." Holmes smiled thinly. "Patience, Inspector. A silent prisoner may yet speak through his associates. Tell me, did you search their lodgings?" Lestrade produced a bundle of papers from his coat. "We did. A shabby room near Clerkenwell, filled with nothing but empty bottles and scraps of foreign newspapers. But we found this." He handed Holmes a folded slip, upon which was scrawled a series of numbers and letters. Holmes's eyes brightened. "A code, and a crude one at that. Here, Watson, observe. These letters correspond not to words, but to ship names, abbreviated for convenience. And these numbers, docking schedules. Our friends were in correspondence with men at the river. It is the San Bartolomeo, a Venetian freighter due to depart within 2 days." I leaned closer. "Then the coffer is destined for that vessel?" "Precisely. The chest will be loaded under cover of night, disguised among ordinary cargo. But it is a prize too weighty to be smuggled without help. There must be dockmen in their pay. That is where we shall strike, Watson." By late afternoon we were already at the riverside, the damp air reeking of tar and fish, the cries of gulls mingling with the shouts of stevedores. Holmes moved with swift precision, his eyes darting to every cart, every bundle, every grimy face that passed us. At one warehouse he paused, stooping to examine a smear upon the cobblestones. He touched it with a gloved finger and lifted it for my view. "Note the grain of oak, Watson, pressed into the tar." This was no ordinary crate, but one of great weight. It was dragged, not carried, and here the faint impression of the iron bands. The coffer passed this way within the last 12 hours. We followed the trail down a narrow alley toward a warehouse marked with the name of a shipping agent whose ledgers Holmes had already inspected. The door was ajar, and within the gloom we discerned stacks of cargo, bales of cloth, and barrels of oil. Holmes moved like a hound upon the scent, weaving between crates until he came to a corner, half concealed by tarpaulins. "There," he whispered. A heavy chest rested upon a pallet, its iron bands glinting faintly in the light of Holmes's lantern. The very object whose absence had troubled Ashcombe House lay before us. My heart leapt, but Holmes's hand restrained me. "Not so fast, Watson. If the prey is before us, then so too is the snare. Observe." Even as he spoke, a sound echoed through the warehouse, the shuffle of boots, the low murmur of voices speaking Italian. Holmes extinguished the lantern in an instant, and we crouched behind the cargo. 2 men entered, lanterns in hand, and advanced toward the chest. They spoke rapidly, their gestures urgent. One tapped the iron bands with a crowbar, while the other consulted a slip of paper, nodding toward the ledger nailed to the wall. Holmes leaned close to my ear. "They mean to move it tonight. If we reveal ourselves now, they will scatter like rats. Better we follow and see to whose hold they carry their prize." We watched in silence as the men looped ropes around the chest and dragged it laboriously toward the rear entrance. There a cart awaited, its wheels muffled with cloth, its driver a sullen fellow, whose features I glimpsed only briefly in the lamplight. The coffer was heaved aboard with groans and curses, and the men climbed up beside it. The driver cracked his whip, and the cart rolled slowly into the fog. Holmes rose, his eyes shining with triumph. "Come, Watson. The game is afoot in earnest. Keep low, keep silent. We must not lose them." Thus began a pursuit through the fog-bound streets of London, our quarry never more than a shadow before us, the creak of their wheels our only guide. At times they vanished into the mist, only for Holmes to recover the trail with uncanny precision, noting the fresh gouges upon the cobbles, the faint scent of oil from the lantern they carried. At last the cart descended toward the river, halting before a dock where the San Bartolomeo loomed, her dark hull looming above the water like some slumbering beast. We watched from concealment as the chest was unloaded and borne up the gangplank. The captain, a burly figure in a pea-coat, supervised with evident satisfaction, marking the entry in his manifest. Holmes's hand gripped my arm. "There is our final link. That chest, once stowed aboard, will vanish from English jurisdiction. Tomorrow it sails, and with it the Brotherhood's secrets. Tonight is our only chance." He drew back into the shadows, his mind already racing. "We must act with cunning, not force. To seize it here would provoke half the dock into riot. But if we wait until the cargo is below decks, we may contrive to intercept it unseen. Once it is secure, the law will compel its examination, and our adversaries will be stripped of their power." I saw the fire in his eyes, the fierce joy of the hunt at its height. Yet even as he spoke I felt a chill, for the coffer seemed no mere chest of wood and iron, but a vessel of secrets that men would kill to protect. The fog curled thicker around the masts, the river lapped darkly against the hull, and the shadow of Venice seemed to stretch across the very heart of London. And beside me Holmes, lean and tireless, already shaped in his mind the move that would draw the Brotherhood into the open and shatter the enigma of the mirror. Once and for all, the fog clung to the docks with such thickness that even the lanterns along the quay appeared as faint, wavering globes, their light swallowed before it could spread more than a few feet. Holmes and I lingered in the shadow of a stack of barrels, our eyes fixed upon the gangplank of the San Bartolomeo. The chest had been carried aboard with a display of casual effort, yet I had marked the strain upon the men's faces and the way they bent their backs to its weight. Whatever it contained, it was no mere bundle of papers. Holmes, however, did not appear surprised. His lean figure was taut with anticipation, his eyes brighter than the lanterns, and his lips pressed together in that peculiar expression which meant that the outlines of a plan were already forming in his mind. "Watson," he whispered, "our quarry lies within reach, yet we must move with precision. To attempt seizure in open view would summon a score of dockhands to their defense. No, we must descend into that hold and learn how the chest is stowed. Once we know, we may contrive to place it beyond their grasp." I confess my heart beat faster at the thought of stealing aboard a foreign vessel under the very noses of its crew. But Holmes, with his unshakable composure, left me little room for hesitation. He motioned me to follow as he slipped along the line of warehouses, crouching low until we reached the stern, where a rope ladder dangled idly from the deck above. With the agility of a cat, he seized it and ascended, pausing only long enough to signal me to join. My hands clutched the damp rope, my boots scraping against the timbers, and within moments I found myself beside him. Crouched upon the deck of the Venetian ship, the vessel was quiet, save for the creak of rigging and the faint murmur of voices forward. A watchman paced the deck at intervals, his lantern swinging, but Holmes drew me into the concealment of a stack of coiled ropes until the man passed. Then, with noiseless tread, Holmes moved to a hatch that yawned darkly before us. He produced a small lantern of his own, its light covered by a shutter, and descended into the hold. I followed, the air growing thicker and more pungent with the smell of tar, salt, and damp wood. Within the hold, our eyes adjusted to a dim half-light. Crates were stacked in neat rows, barrels lashed against shifting, and coils of rope hung from pegs. Yet it was to the far corner that Holmes directed his attention, where the chest had been placed upon a pallet and secured with ropes. Its iron bands gleamed faintly, and upon the lid I saw an old seal impressed into the wood, a lion with wings holding a book. Holmes bent low, examining the seal. The mark of St. Mark unmistakable. "This is no common coffer, Watson. It belongs to the Brotherhood that Calvi serves. Within lies their most guarded possession, I have no doubt." His eyes flicked to me. "We cannot yet remove it without raising alarm, but we may contrive to delay its departure." From his pocket, he withdrew a small file and set to work upon the lock that secured the ropes. He did not open it, but merely scored the metal in such a way that a single hard pull would cause it to snap. "Thus," he murmured, "when the time comes, we shall recover this prize with ease. For now we must withdraw. For now we must withdraw." We retraced our steps with careful silence, but as we neared the hatch, the sound of footsteps above froze us in place. Voices spoke in Italian, sharp and urgent. A lantern beam slanted down through the opening, and we pressed ourselves against the shadows, scarcely daring to breathe. One of the men descended, his boots clanging upon the ladder, and advanced into the hold. He carried a list in one hand, muttering as he checked the cargo. When he approached the coffer, Holmes's hand closed upon my arm with iron force, warning me to remain still. The man bent, tapped the chest with his knuckles, then grunted in satisfaction before retreating. The ladder creaked once more, the voices faded, and silence returned. Holmes exhaled softly. "A narrow escape, Watson. Come, this place grows perilous." We regained the deck and descended by the rope ladder once more, finding safety in the fog of the quay. Holmes drew his coat tighter about him, his face pale but resolute. "We know now the nature of our enemy's prize. Tomorrow the San Bartolomeo sails, and with it would vanish the secrets of this Brotherhood. Tonight we must devise the means to intercept it. I have in mind a stratagem that may turn their very artifice against them. Back at Baker Street, Holmes spread before him the notes he had gathered, the scraps of code, and the impressions of the seal. He paced the room, his pipe sending forth spirals of smoke that wreathed his sharp features. Consider, Watson, the symbolism of that mirror. It denied identity, erased the face, rendered the observer powerless. Such an invention serves well those who deal in secrets. The chest is its companion, containing names and records that must remain faceless to the world. If we bring it into the light, their dominion collapses. Yet we must do so lawfully, lest they accuse us of theft. The law cannot act upon superstition, but it can act upon smuggling and conspiracy. He paused, striking the mantel with his hand. Lestrade must be brought to the docks with warrant in hand. But he must come at the precise moment, when the chest is in our grasp, yet before the vessel sails. Timing will be everything. The following evening found us once more at the riverside. Lestrade in tow, grumbling yet obedient. A detachment of officers waited in silence near a warehouse, their breath clouding in the chill air. Holmes had calculated the tide and the hour, and he knew precisely when the crew would attempt to shift the coffer into the ship's manifest under false declaration. We lay in wait, the fog thicker than before, until at last the figures emerged, the same men we had shadowed, accompanied now by two more. Bearing the chest upon their shoulders, they struggled with its weight, cursing under their breath, and advanced toward the gangplank. Holmes gave a signal, and we moved. The officers sprang from the shadows, surrounding the men before they could react. Lestrade himself seized the captain, who blustered and swore in his guttural accent. But Holmes was already at the chest. With a swift wrench he snapped the weakened lock he had prepared, tearing away the ropes. The lid was flung open, and for the first time we beheld the contents. Within lay bundles of parchment, aged and yellowed, bound with silk cords. Each bore seals in red wax, stamped with the Lion of St. Mark. Holmes lifted one with delicate fingers, holding it to the lamplight. Upon the first sheet I glimpsed names, dates, and oaths written in Italian, the ink faded but legible. It was a register, a record of men sworn to secrecy, their obligations, their debts. The entire brotherhood was catalogued within those pages. A murmur of astonishment passed among the officers. Lestrade's eyes widened. "Good Lord, Holmes, what have you uncovered? These papers could ruin half the Italians in London." "More than half, Inspector," Holmes replied coolly. "They could ruin men of power in Venice, perhaps even beyond. But it is not for us to wield them. The law shall decide their fate." The prisoners were bound and carried off, cursing bitterly in their tongue. The chest, sealed once more, was conveyed under guard to Scotland Yard. Holmes, his task complete, drew his coat about him and turned toward the fog-shrouded city. As we walked back along the embankment, I could not suppress a shudder. "Holmes, this brotherhood, will they not seek vengeance?" "You have struck at the very heart of their secrecy." He smiled faintly, though his eyes were weary. "Doubtless they will curse my name in a dozen Venetian taverns, but secrecy thrives only so long as it is hidden. Once exposed, it crumbles. They may rebuild, but never with the same power. Our duty was not to destroy them, but to drag their mask into the light." And with that he strode on through the mist, his figure tall and lean, the very embodiment of reason triumphing over shadow. Yet in my heart I felt the unease of one who has looked into a mirror and seen not his face, but the void that waits behind it. For though the chest was ours, I knew the mystery of the faceless glass was not yet spent, and that Holmes's mind still labored toward the final revelation that would bind together every thread of this strange affair. The morning after our interception at the docks found Holmes in an unusually contemplative humor. He sat by the window of our sitting room, the winter sun struggling through the haze of Baker Street, its weak light falling across the open chest of Venetian parchments spread upon the table. I had never seen a collection of documents so venerable, nor so ominous in their implications. The names inscribed there were legion, many accompanied by annotations that hinted at debts of loyalty, obligations of secrecy, or penalties of betrayal. It was as though the very lifeblood of a hidden society had been drained into ink. Holmes leafed through them with deft fingers, his sharp eyes glancing over each page, yet absorbing their essence with astonishing swiftness. "Observe, Watson," he murmured, "how the pattern emerges. This is not a brotherhood of mere smugglers or thieves, but a network of influence extending into commerce, politics, and the church itself. Men of wealth and station have bound themselves with oaths that place loyalty to the Brotherhood above loyalty to law or conscience. Lord Ashcombe, by acquiring this coffer, did not merely pilfer a relic, he grasped a lever with which to move empires. I shuddered at the thought. And now that lever rests within Scotland Yard. Do you believe Lestrade comprehends the gravity of what has fallen into his hands? Holmes allowed himself a brief sardonic smile. Lestrade is an honest man, but his imagination rarely stretches beyond the immediate charge sheet. He will catalogue these papers as evidence against Calvi and his accomplices, never suspecting that within them lies a history capable of shaking governments, which is perhaps just as well, for the Yard is not equipped to guard such a trove of secrets. But mark me, Watson, the Brotherhood will not accept defeat so tamely. They will make one last effort to recover what has been lost. The mirror and the coffer belong to them as twin symbols, one of concealment, the other of memory. With the chest in English custody, their power is broken unless they contrive to strike at its heart. Even as he spoke, a knock sounded upon our door, and Mrs. Hudson entered with a telegram upon a tray. Holmes tore it open with a flick of his long fingers. His eyes narrowed as he read. As I expected, Lestrade requests our immediate presence. There has been an incident at the Yard. Within the hour we were in Whitehall, striding into the bustling corridors of Scotland Yard. Lestrade met us with a face pale from strain. Here's the strangest thing, Mr. Holmes. The Ashcombe chest gone. Holmes' eyes flashed. Gone? Explain yourself. Lestrade led us into the evidence room where shelves of exhibits stood under lock and key. In the center space was a void where the chest had rested only the previous night. The iron brackets that secured it were splintered. The floor scored with marks of heavy dragging. Impossible, Lestrade muttered. The room was guarded all night. Yet some devilry has spirited it away. Holmes crouched, running his fingers along the gouges. He sniffed at the air, then rose with grim certainty. No devilry, Inspector. Human agency, aided by cunning and audacity. Observe the marks. The chest was hauled through that door, not lifted. And here a smear of oil with the scent of clove. Our Venetian adversaries again. They have dared to strike at the very heart of your fortress. Lestrade cursed under his breath. Then my men have been bribed or duped. I'll have every guard questioned. Do so, Holmes replied coolly. But do not expect confession. These men are adept at silence. The question is not how the chest was removed, but where it has been taken. For once we know its destination, the path back to the Brotherhood becomes clear. We quitted the Yard at once, Holmes moving with fierce energy. His gaze swept the streets, the hansoms, the carts, as though each might conceal the prize. Watson, he said, they cannot yet have borne it abroad. The docks are watched, and to move such a burden openly would be folly. No, they will hide it temporarily in some safe house until the way is clear. Our task is to anticipate their choice. He led me through a maze of alleys to Clerkenwell, where the Italians had long maintained their enclaves. There we entered a tavern thick with smoke and foreign tongues. Holmes spoke little, but his mere presence drew furtive glances. At a corner table he sat, listening intently to the murmur of voices. Presently he leaned close to me. Did you catch it, Watson? The name whispered twice. Santa Lucia. That is no saint invoked for blessing, but the name of a warehouse near the river. They believe themselves secure there. Night had already fallen when we approached the warehouse, its windows dark, its great doors barred. Holmes examined the lock with delicate care, producing from his pocket a set of slender tools. With scarcely a sound he coaxed it open, and we slipped inside. The interior was vast and echoing, filled with bales of cloth and casks of wine. Yet in the far corner stood the chest, its bulk unmistakable even in the dim light. 2 men kept watch beside it, pistols upon their belts. Holmes motioned me to silence. He crouched low, studying the shadows, then drew a whistle from his pocket. A sharp, piercing note rang out. In an instant, 6 constables surged from the darkness, Lestrade at their head. The guards sprang up, reaching for their weapons, but were overwhelmed before they could fire. The struggle was brief, the Venetians bound and cursing. Holmes approached the chest, laying his hand upon its iron bands. Twice stolen, twice recovered. But the game is not yet done. Mark me, Watson. The Brotherhood will not cease until the mirror and the coffer are reunited. It is the union of the two that gives them their strength. So long as one remains beyond their reach, they are incomplete. That is why they risked so much to reclaim this. As the constables carried the chest under guard, Lestrade shook his head in bewilderment. "I'll not sleep easy until this thing is out of London altogether." "It's cursed, if you ask me." Holmes' eyes gleamed. "Not cursed, Inspector. Coveted. And men will kill for what they covet. Guard it well tonight, for I believe we stand upon the brink of the Brotherhood's final gambit. They will strike once more, and when they do, we shall be ready." We returned to Baker Street in the small hours, the city sunk in uneasy slumber. Holmes threw himself into his chair, steepling his fingers, his gaze fixed upon the smoke curling from his pipe. "Watson, we have reached the penultimate act. The adversary has revealed his boldness in striking at Scotland Yard itself. The mirror waits in Ashcombe House, the chest now secured once more. They must attempt the union, and when they do, the truth will at last stand naked before us. Until then, we must watch, we must wait, and we must prepare." I studied his lean features, sharpened by the firelight, and felt once more the chill that had haunted me since first I beheld my absent face in that Venetian glass. For Holmes had spoken truly. The end was near, but whether it would bring resolution or ruin neither of us yet knew. The hours that followed were among the most strained I can recall in all my years with Holmes. The chest, having been twice stolen and twice recovered, was now lodged under constant guard in a secure chamber at Scotland Yard, and yet Holmes was far from satisfied. He paced the length of our sitting room as though it were a cage, every so often stopping to gaze out upon the street below, where the fog once more had gathered like a living thing. His pipe smouldered between his fingers, forgotten more often than smoked, and his eyes burned with a restless intensity. "Watson," he said at last, halting before the hearth, "you will forgive me if I speak with a frankness that might unsettle you. We stand upon the brink of the Brotherhood's final move. Twice thwarted, they must act with desperation, and desperate men are most dangerous when the object of their desire lies within sight but beyond grasp. Mark me, they will not rest until mirror and coffer are reunited. Their every design, their every oath, hinges upon the conjunction of concealment and memory. With the chest alone they are crippled. With the mirror alone they are incomplete. Together they wield dominion over their followers. Thus the Ashcombe House remains the stage upon which this drama must conclude." I confess I felt a chill at his words, for the thought of returning once more to that eerie drawing-room, with its Venetian glass that denied the human countenance, filled me with dread. Yet Holmes's tone brooked no denial, and I knew he had already resolved upon the course. Our summons came before midnight. A messenger from Lestrade arrived, breathless, reporting that the guards at the yard had detected a disturbance outside the evidence chamber. No attempt had yet been made, but the inspector feared an assault and begged Holmes's counsel. Holmes read the note with a grim smile. "Just as I foretold, Watson. They have failed by force, and now they will seek guile. We must be in two places at once, one to defend the chest, the other to watch the mirror. Lestrade will do his duty at the yard. We must return to Ashcombe House. It is there the Brotherhood will gather, believing that in shadows and phantoms they still hold the advantage. Within the hour we were once more at Bloomsbury, our cab depositing us before the darkened townhouse. Holmes moved with quiet purpose, a lantern in one hand, his revolver concealed but ready. The constable who had been stationed there greeted us nervously, reporting no sign of disturbance. Holmes dismissed him to a lower floor and motioned me to follow. Together we ascended to the drawing-room, whose oppressive silence pressed upon us like a weight. The mirror loomed in its accustomed place, reflecting the chamber but erasing our faces. I shuddered anew as I gazed upon that void where my countenance should have been. Holmes, however, studied it with the keenest fascination, his eyes roaming from frame to floor, from sconces to carpet. He set the lantern upon the mantel and whispered, "Patience, Watson. They will come. When they do, remember, our task is not to fight, but to observe. For in observing, we shall at last uncover the purpose that has eluded us." The minutes dragged with agonizing slowness. The clock upon the mantel chimed the half-hour. Then at last a faint sound stirred the silence, the creak of a board in the corridor. Holmes's eyes glinted. He motioned me into the shadows beside the curtain, while he himself crouched near the panel behind the mirror. The door opened, and three figures slipped inside, cloaked and hooded, their movements swift and assured. One carried a bundle wrapped in velvet, another a satchel of tools, while the third set a small candelabrum upon the table and lit it with trembling hands. Their voices, low and urgent, spoke in Italian, fragments of which I caught, the words speculum, fratelli, segreto. Holmes's eyes never wavered, his breath scarcely stirring. With careful reverence they approached the mirror. The velvet bundle was unwrapped, revealing a smaller coffer, ornate though less imposing than the Ashcombe chest. The leader placed it before the glass, then drew from his cloak a parchment inscribed with characters I could not decipher. He began to chant in a harsh whisper, the others bowing their heads. The mirror shimmered faintly, its surface darkening, and for a moment I could have sworn that shapes moved within its depth. Holmes sprang forward with sudden force, his voice ringing through the chamber. "Enough of this pageantry. The age of shadows is ended. Stand aside, gentlemen, for the law of England observes you now." The intruders recoiled, their hands flying to their weapons. I leapt from my concealment, revolver drawn, and the standoff lasted but a heartbeat before Holmes, with lightning swiftness, snatched the smaller coffer from the table and flung it toward me. "Guard it, Watson," he cried. The leader shouted an oath, lunging toward Holmes, but Holmes sidestepped with practiced grace, striking the man's wrist so that his dagger clattered to the floor. The second intruder raised a pistol, but my revolver was already leveled, and at the sight of it he faltered. The third, perhaps wiser than the others, turned and fled into the corridor, his cloak vanishing into the darkness. The struggle was fierce but brief. Holmes subdued the leader with a grip of iron, while I kept the second covered until the constable, alarmed by the noise, rushed in with his truncheon and completed the arrest. The men were bound, their hoods torn away, revealing faces pale with fanaticism and eyes that burned with hatred. Holmes turned at once to the mirror, which still shimmered faintly. He pressed the panel, exposing the mechanism, and with a swift wrench he disabled the device, shattering the cunning arrangement of glass and wires. The surface dulled, reflecting truly once more, and for the first time since our first encounter, it showed our faces clear and whole. "There, Watson," Holmes said with satisfaction. "The phantom is laid to rest. Their illusion depended upon this contrivance, nothing more. But their true purpose lay in uniting these coffers, the one at Scotland Yard, the other here. Together they contained the charter of their brotherhood, the names of their brethren, the codes of their secrecy. United they were power. Divided they are but evidence." I held the smaller coffer tightly, its weight heavy with significance. "Then we have broken them, Holmes. The mirror is silenced, their leaders captured, their secrets seized." Holmes' eyes gleamed in the candlelight. "We have broken this arm of their design, yes. But such societies thrive like weeds. Cut one branch and another sprouts. Yet their dominion in London is ended. They may still whisper in Venetian halls, but here their mask has slipped, and their faceless terror is no more." Lestrade arrived within the hour, summoned by the constable's whistle, and expressed his astonishment at what he found. The prisoners were conveyed under heavy guard, the coffer secured, and the mirror at last dismantled. Holmes gave his account with customary brevity, leaving Lestrade to marvel at the ingenuity of the scheme and the audacity of its execution. When at last we returned to Baker Street, weary yet exultant, Holmes sank into his chair with a sigh of rare contentment. "You perceive, Watson, how every thread converged. The absent face in the mirror, the vanished coffer, the Venetian seal, the threats, the thefts, all were but steps in a single dance. They sought to cloak themselves in mystery, but in so doing they revealed the very pattern that betrayed them. A society that lives in shadows cannot endure the gaze of the sun." I could not resist a smile, though my weariness was profound. "And as ever, Holmes, you have brought the sun to bear." He inclined his head, a rare warmth softening his keen features. "Not I alone, Watson. Your steadfast hand and steady aim were as essential as any deduction. Without them the void might indeed have swallowed us." And with that he closed his eyes, the smoke of his pipe curling upward, his face serene at last. For though the night had been long and the foe formidable, the mirror that refused to show a face now stood powerless, and the truth, once hidden, had been drawn inexorably into the light. The days that followed passed with a curious quiet, as though the city itself had conspired to lay the matter gently to rest. Lestrade, with an air of dogged pride, announced the success of his men in apprehending the Venetian conspirators, though his account, published in the morning journals, reduced the affair to no more than the breaking of a smuggling ring. No mention was made of mirrors that swallowed faces, nor of charters bound in ancient seals, nor of oaths whispered beneath the Lion of St. Mark. To the public, it was a tale swiftly forgotten, drowned in the flood of petty thefts and political scandals that filled the columns. Holmes, however, was not so quick to dismiss it. He spent long hours in his chair at Baker Street, his gaze far away, as though his mind still walked the shadowed corridors of Ashcombe House. The Venetian mirror, dismantled at his own hands, now lay in fragments in the yard's evidence room, its tricks of reflection rendered harmless. The two coffers, one large, one small, were secured together under lock and key, their contents translated by scholars who muttered of strange societies and darker times. For all its menace, the Brotherhood was stripped of its mask, and its grasp upon London's heart was severed. Yet it was not victory alone that occupied Holmes, but the philosophy of it. "Consider it, Watson," he said one evening, as he turned the stem of his pipe between his fingers. "A mirror designed to erase the very face of man, and a chest filled with records of obedience and secrecy. The first robbed men of identity, the second enslaved them to memory. Together they formed a mechanism of control, fear without and compulsion within. Ashcombe, whether by design or by folly, stole both, and by so doing drew upon himself the watchful wrath of those he had wronged. Still haunted by the recollection of my faceless reflection, remarked that the contrivance had succeeded in its purpose. For even I, Holmes, a man of science, felt a chill at the sight. It was as though my very soul had been blotted out." Holmes smiled faintly, though his eyes were grave. "Fear is the simplest tool, my dear Watson, and the most potent. The Brotherhood trusted too much in its illusions, believing that terror was impregnable. But illusions are fragile things. The moment one sees the mechanism behind them, the spell is broken. We have not destroyed them, only revealed them as men in cloaks rather than phantoms in the glass." We spoke little further on the matter, and in time it faded into the vast gallery of Holmes's cases. Yet I cannot forget the peculiar sensation of those weeks, the sense that London's fog concealed more than soot and smoke, that behind every shuttered window some secret society might be at work, binding men to oaths written in forgotten tongues. Nor can I forget the image of Holmes, standing tall before the Venetian glass, his own face returned to him by the force of reason, while his enemies' shadows dissolved into nothing. The Ashcombe townhouse was sold at last, its contents dispersed, its rooms aired of their gloom. The mirror was never rehung, the heirs preferring to consign it to destruction rather than endure its baleful reputation. The coffer and its contents, I was told, were consigned to the custody of the Crown, there to moulder in secrecy. Perhaps it is better so, for the less the world knows of such things, the safer it may be. On a quiet afternoon some weeks later, I found Holmes at his violin, drawing from it a melody of curious melancholy, neither wholly sad nor wholly triumphant. When he lowered the bow, I asked whether the case had satisfied him. "Insofar as it demonstrated once again the triumph of observation over artifice, yes," he said. "But there is always another web, Watson, another hand weaving in the dark. One cannot hope to cut them all. It is enough that for a time one mirror has been shattered, one mask torn away. The rest must wait for another day." And with that he returned to his bow, the music rising once more to mingle with the fog that drifted past our window, an echo of mystery that London, in her infinite capacity for secrets, would never be without, would never